Hollywood has always had a dirty little secret. For some stars, the casting couch wasn't just a rumor, it was practically a rite of passage. Before the censors showed up to spoil the party, pre-code Hollywood was a playground where fame often came with a price. And some were bold enough to admit exactly how they paid it. Would you trade your dignity for a shot at stardom? Tonight, we're peeling back the velvet curtain and naming the legends who confessed to sleeping their way to fame. Ready for the real Hollywood story? Joan Crawford. If you think Joan Crawford built her empire on talent alone, you're missing the backstage drama entirely. Joan was nobody's fool. She clawed her way out of poverty, literally from a Texas laundry, to become one of MGM's most powerful queens. But the road wasn't paved with red carpets. It was littered with whispered deals, smoky backroom meetings, and yes, a few unmade beds. Crawford was famously frank about her ambition, even with her closest friends. Several biographers, including Charlotte Chandler, paint a picture of a woman who understood early on that sex was a currency in Hollywood, and she wasn't about to go broke. She reportedly confessed in private that, "I'll do whatever it takes," and whatever it takes in the 1920s meant a lot more than learning your lines. Studio insiders whispered about her liaisons with directors and producers, from Harry Raff to MGM's head honchos, hinting that no opportunity was ever wasted. What's wild is that Joan never played the victim. She saw herself as a survivor in an industry that chewed up girls and spat them out. Her unapologetic drive became the stuff of legend, and she owned her choices. When others pretended innocence, Joan turned those rumors into power. In a world built on secrets, she cashed in on every single one. Say what you will about her methods, but Joan Crawford's career outlasted the very men who thought they could own her. Was it ruthless? Maybe. But in pre-code Hollywood, nice girls didn't get the close-up. Joan did, and she made damn sure everyone remembered it. Clairbeau Hollywood's original It Girl was the poster child for living fast and loving faster, and Clairbeau never pretended otherwise. Born in Brooklyn poverty, she charged into the silent era with wild energy and a reputation that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. Her big break came from winning a beauty contest, but what followed was a high-octane ride through studio backlots, after-hours parties, and bedrooms where deals were made as easily as martinis. Beau was brutally honest about the price of fame. Friends and confidants have recounted her plain-spoken admissions that sleeping around wasn't just a rumor, it was the way the game was played. She once quipped to a reporter, "Hollywood is like a big bed. You have to know who to get in with." And get in she did. Her flings with directors, studio executives, and co-stars were as famous as her movies. Clara never pretended her rise was pure luck or raw talent. She knew charm and chemistry were just as important as acting lessons, especially when studio moguls had the final word on casting. But Beau's candor was both her shield and her undoing. The gossip rags loved her, and the public couldn't look away. But behind the bravado was a woman who understood the toll of transactional relationships. Her career, though meteoric, burned out just as fast, pushed aside by the very men who once promised her the world in whispered midnight meetings. Was she a victim? Hardly. Clara Beau made her choices with her eyes wide open, trading innocence for influence in a town that never played fair. If you think she regretted it, just remember, in her own words, "I did what I had to do," and she became a legend for it. Jean Harlo. Long before she was crowned the blonde bombshell, Jean Harlo knew exactly how to work a room. And a rumor. Hollywood in the early 1930s was a free-for-all, and Harlo, with her platinum hair and come-hither smile, was a master of surviving in the wild. She famously quipped, "I always say, keep your chin up and your knees together, but not necessarily in that order." That wasn't just a joke. It was her calling card. From the minute she hit the scene, Harlo's name was tied to a carousel of powerful men. The industry buzzed about her special friendships with producers like Howard Hughes, who cast her in Hell's Angels and promoted her relentlessly. Insiders, and even Harlo herself in private letters, acknowledged that some roles didn't come just from screen tests. She was frank with close friends about using her sexuality as a weapon in a business where men had all the ammunition. In one letter, she confessed, "I know what they want, and I know how to get what I want too." But Harlo didn't hide behind the starlet script. She joked openly about getting ahead on her back, turning a shameful accusation into her personal punchline. It's no wonder directors lined up to work with her. She brought more than a sultry stare. She brought an understanding of how the Hollywood machine actually worked. That awareness and her unapologetic attitude made her both envied and feared. Harlo's career was a rocket, but it burned bright and fast. She died at just 26, but not before leaving an indelible mark, not only as a screen goddess, but as someone who never pretended Hollywood was clean. In an era when other actresses lied or played coy, Harlo winked, nodded, and said, "Yeah, I know the game." And if you're honest, you have to respect a player who never lied about the rules. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's name is synonymous with Hollywood scandal, and she wore that reputation like a badge of honor, at least at first. If anyone ever wrote a cautionary tale about fame's darkest side, they'd have to start with Barbara. She wasn't born into the business or handed anything on a silver platter. Instead, she hustled, charmed, and by her own admission, slept her way to the top even if the top didn't last. Payton's rise was meteoric. Studio execs couldn't resist her looks, and she quickly became a fixture at all the right parties. In her brutally honest memoir, I Am Not Ashamed, Barbara laid out her history with a rawness that left nothing to the imagination. She detailed flings and affairs with directors, producers, and anyone who could give her a leg up in the cutthroat industry. She admitted flat out, "I used what I had, and I wasn't the only one." The candor didn't win her many friends among Hollywood's elite, but it did make her unforgettable. She snagged roles in films like Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye opposite James Cagney, but the good times didn't last. As quickly as she rose, Barbara crashed, caught in a spiral of addiction, toxic relationships, and public humiliation. Her willingness to speak the truth about Hollywood's sexual politics made her a pariah in a town built on pretense. Yet Payton's story isn't just a tragedy. It's a mirror held up to an industry that chews through dreamers. She broke the code of silence, telling the world exactly what it cost to chase fame. Some called her reckless, others called her doomed, but Barbara Payton made sure her voice and her warning would outlive the scandals. In the end, she didn't ask for pity. She demanded honesty. And in Hollywood, that's a rare kind of courage. Tula Bankhead. If pre-code Hollywood ever had a queen of shock and awe, it was Tula Bankhead. Outspoken, unpredictable, and blessed with a razor wit, Tula lived her life like an open book, one filled with forbidden chapters and scandalous footnotes. She once famously declared, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never said a word about women and cocaine." That's not just a punchline, it's practically a mission statement. Tula was notorious for her bedroom antics and made no attempt to hide the role sex played in her career. Friends and foes alike recalled her as the woman who slept with anyone who could help me. She flouted convention, making passes at both men and women with equal boldness. When asked if she'd ever had an affair with a producer to get a part, she retorted, "Darling, I've slept with producers, directors, actors, actresses, stagehands, writers, and God knows who else. It's the only way to be sure you're seen." What set Bankhead apart wasn't just her fearless appetite for pleasure. It was her refusal to be shamed for it. She treated Hollywood's so-called dirty secret like a running gag, turning it into performance art. Directors knew if you wanted Tula in your film, the deal would be memorable, on and off the screen. She leveraged every liaison with charm, wit, and a healthy dose of self-awareness. Tula's career soared on stage and screen, but she never let stardom tame her wild side. Her openness about sex, especially in an era obsessed with covering it up, made her both legendary and dangerous. In the end, Tula Bankhead played by her own rules, rewriting the script on what it meant to be a woman in Hollywood. If you're shocked, that's exactly how she liked it. Mae West. Mae West wasn't just the queen of double entendres. She was the one writing the book on Hollywood's sexual politics. Before the censors tried to lock up her sultry brand of wit, Mae was already a legend for using her charm, curves, and candor to bulldoze her way onto the A-list. Her signature drawl, "Why don't you come up and see me sometime?" wasn't just a line, it was a challenge. And everybody knew it, but Mae West didn't hide behind clever quips alone. She spoke openly in interviews and her own writings about using her sexuality to get ahead, often packaging hard truths in velvet gloves. "I believe in sex. I think it's here to stay." she famously said, and she made sure the studios understood she could offer what the censors didn't want anyone admitting: raw, unapologetic desire. She wasn't shy about how the casting couch worked. She just made sure she was always the one calling the shots. Studio heads might have thought they were exploiting May, but she was always 2 steps ahead. Her affairs with directors and producers became part of her mythos, something she'd joke about, then wink to the audience as if to say, "You know what I mean." If anyone thought Mae West would play by their rules, they clearly never met Mae West. She made the rules. Mae used every connection, every flirtation, every whispered promise as fuel for her own creative fire. And when the Hays Code came crashing down, it was Mae West they blamed for corrupting American morals. But the joke was on them. Her career, her fortune, and her lasting influence were built not just on talent, but on her refusal to play by anyone else's rules. In a business where everyone played coy, Mae West was refreshingly, almost shockingly honest, and Hollywood has never seen anyone quite like her since. Lupe Velez. When Lupe Velez stormed onto the Hollywood scene, she did it with a force that made the town sit up and pay attention. Dubbed the Mexican Spitfire, Lupe was as open about her passions as she was about her ambitions. She knew how Hollywood operated, and she didn't sugarcoat her experiences for anyone, not the press, not the studios, and certainly not her competitors. Velez's path to fame was anything but traditional. She arrived in Los Angeles determined to make it, but quickly discovered that her looks and charisma opened doors that talent alone might not have. In interviews and personal letters, Lupe was blunt. Sleeping with the right people opens doors in Hollywood that are locked to outsiders. It wasn't a confession whispered in shame. It was a statement of fact in an industry where everyone played the same game but few admitted it. Her relationships with powerful men, from Gary Cooper to various influential producers, were hardly secrets. Instead of hiding her liaisons, Lupe made them part of her persona. She was often photographed on the arm of the industry's biggest names, sparking gossip that she gleefully stoked. Friends and columnists alike recalled her candid jokes about her Hollywood education, which she said involved more bedrooms than classrooms. Lupe's story is a wild ride of triumphs, heartbreaks, and spectacular scandals. But one thing was always clear: she was never the naive ingenue. Velez controlled her image, made her own rules, and refused to apologize for using every tool at her disposal, including her sexuality. In an industry built on pretense, Lupe Velez was real to the core. And that, more than anything, is why she remains an unforgettable force in pre-code history. Barbara Lamar. Barbara Lamar's life reads like a Hollywood melodrama full of dazzling highs, destructive lows, and confessions that shocked even her closest friends. Nicknamed the girl who was too beautiful, Barbara knew early on that looks could open doors faster than talent ever could. But in the brutal early days of Hollywood, those doors came with conditions, and she was candid about the toll. Biographer Sherry Snyder captured Barbara's world, a place where sexual favors were a necessary currency for women trying to get noticed. Lamar didn't just admit to it. She spoke with a sort of world-weary acceptance, telling friends and journalists that her beauty was both a blessing and a burden. "Men expect things in return," she confided. "And if you say no, there's always another girl waiting to say yes." Barbara didn't pretend her meteoric rise was a fairy tale. She knew how the game was played. Her liaisons with influential men, actors, directors, and especially studio bosses were an open secret. She navigated Hollywood's labyrinth by leveraging connections others only whispered about. Even as her reputation suffered, Barbara Lamar refused to play the martyr. Instead, she leaned into her image, using scandal as her own brand of publicity. But the price was steep. Barbara's brief, tumultuous life was marked by addiction, health crises, and heartbreak, all hastened by the demands of a system that devoured women's youth and beauty. Yet in the end, her honesty set her apart. She didn't sugarcoat what it cost to chase fame, and she made sure the world would remember the truth long after the lights faded. Peg Antwistle. Peg Antwistle's legacy is usually reduced to the tragic story of the Hollywood sign girl. But what's rarely discussed is how brutally honest she was about what went on behind closed doors. Peg arrived in Hollywood with Broadway credentials and big dreams, but quickly learned the only thing harder than landing a leading role was surviving the unwritten rules of the industry. This was pre-code Hollywood, after all, a place where opportunity often came with strings attached, and plenty of strings were pulled in the bedroom. Letters and accounts published after Peg's untimely death reveal a woman both hopeful and hardened by the realities of the business. She confided to friends that she'd been pressured by producers, sometimes giving in because it seemed like the only way to avoid being passed over. In those rare moments of raw candor, Peg admitted that she'd slept with a couple of the men who promised to help her career, but was devastated when most of those promises went nowhere. For Peg, these experiences weren't just humiliating, they left scars. She saw other young actresses rise and fall the same way, chewed up and spit out by the Hollywood machine. And while she never named names in public, her private letters, shared by relatives years later, made it clear she felt manipulated and used by the system. Peg's story is often romanticized as a cautionary tale about chasing fame, but the truth is more brutal and more common than Hollywood wants to admit. She wasn't the first or the last to discover that sometimes doing what it takes isn't enough, and that even the darkest secrets can't guarantee a place in the spotlight. Her honesty about her struggles remains one of the most haunting parts of her legend. Laya Lee. Laya Lee's life was as dramatic as any role she played on screen. Known in her heyday as the good little bad girl, she wasn't shy about revealing the less glamorous side of fame. Laya's rise started with a flurry of studio contracts and magazine covers, but it was what happened off camera that truly defined her place in pre-code Hollywood. Unlike some of her peers, Laya actually admitted on the record how her personal relationships became the stepping stones to success. During a very public and messy divorce, Lee found herself in court, under oath, and with nothing left to lose. She confessed that her relationships with powerful men had been crucial for her survival in an industry that was quick to discard anyone who played by the rules. "I did what I had to do," she reportedly told the court, "because in Hollywood, you're either somebody's favorite or you're nobody." That kind of candor was almost unheard of, especially from a star whose image had been built on innocence and wide-eyed charm. Rumors had always swirled around Laya's romances with studio executives, directors, and even fellow actors. The tabloids ate it up, but Lee didn't care. She'd already paid the price. The more honest she became, the less Hollywood wanted to hear from her. Studios wanted their scandals swept under the rug, but Laya was determined to tell her story her own way. By the end of her career, Laya Lee's openness about the casting couch made her a controversial figure, but it also made her a pioneer of sorts. She refused to be shamed for playing a game she hadn't invented, and her defiant honesty still resonates in an industry that's only recently started to reckon with its past. Virginia Rappe. For decades, Virginia Rappe's name was synonymous with one of Hollywood's earliest and ugliest scandals. But lost in the noise of tabloid headlines and whispered accusations is the real story of a woman who was heartbreakingly candid about the industry's unwritten rules. Virginia entered the movie business at a time when the silent film world was as wild as any speakeasy, full of glamour, danger, and more than a little predation. While most accounts of Rappe focus on the infamous Fatty Arbuckle case, personal letters and friends' memoirs tell a different story. Virginia admitted to her inner circle that she quickly learned the price of entry for young actresses wasn't just talent, but a willingness to play along with powerful men's advances. "That's just the way things work here," she confided, weary but matter of fact. She never claimed to enjoy it, but she understood it was often the only way to land a part or keep a contract. Rappe's approach was pragmatic. She played the game with her eyes wide open, refusing to dress up her choices in fairy tales or lies. The roles she landed were hard-won, and she was honest about the toll it took on her spirit. In private, she admitted to being used and sometimes using others in return. It was a harsh reality, but for Virginia, there was no point pretending otherwise. Her life was cut short before she could tell her full story, but the fragments that remain reveal a woman who faced the truth head-on. In an era where silence was expected, Virginia Rappe's willingness to speak the ugly truth stands out as one of the bravest confessions in early Hollywood. She didn't ask for sympathy, only that people remember what it really took to survive in the city of dreams. Evelyn Brent. Evelyn Brent was the kind of pre-code star who looked like she'd never blink in the face of trouble. On screen, she was all sharp cheekbones, smoky eyes, and an attitude that said, "Try me." Off screen, she was even tougher, especially when it came to talking about the Hollywood hustle. While many actresses ducked and dodged questions about how they got ahead, Evelyn was far less coy in her later years. By the time the glamour of the silent era started to fade, Brent let her guard down and got blunt with friends and biographers. "I went along to get along," she said. Those 5 words spoke volumes about the era's open secrets. Evelyn was nobody's pushover, but she knew that refusing the wrong invitation could mean career suicide. She talked about the so-called friendships with Paramount executives that turned into opportunities, roles that went to favorite girls who knew how to play the game. What set Brent apart was her ability to survive. She weathered the transition from silent films to talkies, adapting her persona as the industry changed, but the unwritten rules stayed the same. She never played the wide-eyed victim. If anything, she made the casting couch into a calculated business transaction. "If you wanted to keep your contract, you did what was expected," she later admitted, shrugging off the shame others tried to pin on her. But Hollywood's appetite for fresh faces is endless, and Brent eventually faded from the front lines. Even so, her legacy lives on as a reminder. Behind every glamorous close-up was a battlefield, and sometimes the only way to stay in the picture was to play by rules you never wrote. Evelyn Brent didn't apologize for how she survived, she just told it straight, and in pre-code Hollywood, that's as rare as it gets. Marie Provost. Marie Provost had a face made for comedy, a body made for silent-era vamps, and a story that's as heartbreaking as it is revealing. She rocketed to fame in the 1920s. Her name lit up on marquees, and her antics splashed across fan magazines. But behind the laughter, Marie was brutally honest about what it took to stay in the spotlight when the studio system ruled everything, including who got a second chance. In interviews and later private confessions, Marie admitted she faced constant pressure from studio bosses. Pressure that wasn't just about screen tests or acting lessons. "I did what I had to do," she reportedly told a friend, "and I'm not the only one." That meant playing the casting couch game, keeping studio heads happy, and never saying no when the price of refusal was obscurity. The roles didn't always go to the most talented or the hardest working. They went to those who knew how to keep the right people satisfied. Provost's career is a classic case of Hollywood's fickle affection. When she was in favor, she was everywhere, funny, sexy, and irresistible. When the winds changed, she was suddenly too old, too much trouble, or just yesterday's news. The heartbreak of being discarded was something she never hid from close friends. She spoke openly about how the same men who demanded her attention would later turn their backs without a second thought. Her tragic end is often used as a cautionary tale, but the truth is, Marie Provost was a survivor in a system built to break women like her. She refused to let shame rewrite her story, and her confessions about the reality of stardom remain one of the most honest windows into pre-code Hollywood. She played the game and paid the price, but she never pretended it was anything else. Helen Twelvetrees. Helen Twelvetrees was the very picture of vulnerability on screen. Her big, sad eyes and trembling voice made her the queen of melodrama. But don't let the teary roles fool you. Helen had a steel spine, and she knew exactly what it took to keep her name on studio call sheets. In a town where every starlet was replaceable, Helen learned early that sometimes you had to play the game just to survive. It wasn't just rumors and gossip columns fueling Helen's reputation. In a candid 1936 interview, she all but spelled it out, saying, "You do what you must to keep working. Nobody gets to stay unless they're useful to someone." Later, in her autobiography, Helen got even more direct, describing how she'd slept with several key figures in Hollywood to avoid being dropped by the very studios that once touted her as the next big thing. Twelvetrees wasn't proud of these choices, but she wasn't going to let anyone shame her either. She admitted the casting couch was a necessary evil, especially for women who didn't come from money or powerful families. She watched dozens of actresses disappear without a trace, all because they wouldn't or couldn't play along. Helen chose survival, even if it meant enduring whispers and scandal. Her willingness to be honest about the sexual politics of old Hollywood set her apart. While many tried to bury their secrets, Helen let hers out into the open, hoping the truth might spark some change. She rode the wave of fame as long as she could, but when Hollywood lost interest, she still had her story and the courage to tell it. Alice White. If you want to know what Hollywood's pre-code era really looked like behind the champagne bubbles and smoky spotlights, just ask Alice White. She was the quintessential party girl. Big eyes, bigger dreams, and an attitude that said, "Try and stop me." For a while, Alice was everywhere, starring in racy comedies, photographed with the biggest names, and always on the guest list for the wildest parties. But beneath the glitz, Alice was far more candid about the darker side of her rise than most of her peers. As her fame started to fade, Alice shed the sugarcoating and talked bluntly about how the game was played. She told friends and later reporters, "You did what was necessary to survive. If you didn't, someone else would." It wasn't an admission wrung out in shame, but a simple fact from someone who'd seen it all. The casting couch, she said, was never just a rumor. It was practically a rite of passage for any girl who wanted more than a single season of stardom. Alice's liaisons with directors and producers were never really a secret. Gossip columnists had a field day, but Alice used it to her advantage, spinning notoriety into headlines and headlines into roles. She was smart enough to know which powerful men could open doors and bold enough to step through them on her own terms. Even as scandals threatened her reputation, she was quick with a self-deprecating joke, disarming critics with humor, and refusing to play the victim. But the same industry that cheered her on was quick to turn cold when a younger, fresher face came along. Alice White's career fizzled, but her honesty about how she and so many others made it left a mark that still echoes today. In the end, Alice never begged for forgiveness. She just told the truth about a system where innocence was a luxury, and playing the game was the only way to stay in the picture. So, after all the whispers and winks, what do you think? Were these stars, survivors, schemers, or just realists in a town that never played fair? Pre-code Hollywood may be gone, but its secrets still echo in every casting call and comeback story. If this look behind the glamour left you rethinking old Hollywood myths, drop your thoughts in the comments. Smash that like, subscribe for more Hollywood deep dives, and share with a friend who loves a juicy secret. What should we expose next? You decide.